was a calling. As soon as I had that thought, my entire body felt lighter. And like I say, it wasn't like I was planning to leave. I wasn't unhappy. I was really committed to this business. And I had this moment, and I thought, this isn't for me anymore. My body told me it was the right thing to do. So anybody listening to this, I hope by the end of it, you've got the call to adventure in your bones and you're going to act it out.
Okay, Dan, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm really pleased to be here now. Thanks for having me.
If people get just one thing from our conversation today, what do you hope that is?
Do you know what? I hope it's to embrace the inner calling. And it's something I want to get into today because it's something that I got actually from listening to people on your podcast, like Bernardo Kastrup. And I've been living this out, sort of the calling, the inner call of my daimon. And I think it's something I was reflecting on this the last month or so, that it's like I think I want to recommend to people because it's an adventure. So anybody listening to this, I hope by the end of it, you've got the call to adventure in your bones and you're going to act it out.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, and can you tell us a little bit more about what that actually means to you? What does it mean to listen to this inner calling and this call to adventure? What does that actually involve?
I'm going to give you a practical example because it could sound very abstract, this. So I've been self-employed now for, as of this week, sorry, 24 years.
Wow.
So quite a long time. But last summer, I had the call to adventure, so my inner calling, and I sold the shares in my 20-year-old tech company, which is still doing really well, but I'm no longer there, to pursue call it a passion project or something that was close to my heart around mental health. Point being, this wasn't a plan. This was a calling, an inner calling. And prior to that moment, I'd done a lot of inner work. And be it meditation, spiritual books, listening to your podcast, and then particularly around journaling and trying to listen to my body whilst journaling. I call it active journaling, sort of exploring your inner state. Anyway, so I've been working on this for years, stripping away a lot of my kind of self-sabotaging ego, which I'd lived with for years, and got to this point where I'm very connected to my sort of whole body messages. All right, the sort of not just the brain or the rational mind or the data that I can consider, but the sort of intuition.
Hmm.
And I some stuff happened right last summer, and almost immediately I went, I need to leave this business and I need to pursue this new project. And it wasn't, like I say, it wasn't any data. There was no rationality to it. It was a calling. And as soon as I knew, as soon as I had that thought, my entire body felt lighter.
Ooh, okay.
Right? It was weird. And like I say, it wasn't like I was planning to leave. I wasn't unhappy. I was really committed to this business. And I had this moment, and I thought, this isn't for me anymore. And my body told me it was the right thing to do. Okay, now that sounds wonderfully woo and very sort of romantic. Let me just explain. The results of that decision was, a series of challenging, difficult conversations and um, confrontation with fear and real, actual disaster, but which is still going on. I have to say, this is a real time intercession you've got here. This is not like I'm looking back on this, reflecting on how it all worked out. I'm still walking the path. But it was a very much clear moment that happened immediately. And as soon as I had the thought, I knew it was the right thought.
Interesting. Okay, and can you tell us a bit more about the context around the time around this decision happened in your life? What else was going on? You mentioned there you were doing active journaling. What were the contextual factors that sort of led to this this realization that you needed to make a change?
Yeah, I mean, there was some. I actually realized that I wasn't doing what I had this technology company. So if you go back, the only reason I ever got into technology was because I was young at the time of the dot-com boom. And being young, the place I worked, they figured I'd know all about new technology. And of course, I didn't. I just learned on the job in 1997. So that's the only reason I got into technology. But going back a few years prior to that, I actually dropped out of art school to do a history degree, and then ended up working in a PR company because I could write, and then ended up doing their websites because I was young. All right. So I had this sort of weird period of 3 or 4 years where I sort of bounced out of various things and found myself in this career path by dint of what was going on at the time. Okay. And I had a moment where I thought, so the more inner work I had done, the more connected I felt to me. And the more I think I was able to see past, I describe it as kind of like algorithms that are running on you, the patterns, the thought patterns, the sort of belief systems, the identities. And I just thought, so I'd been working on myself, and I kind of realized actually, whilst I love this business, and whilst I want to remain consistent to the sort of role I have within it, and I have hopes about its future financially, etc., really, I'm not a techie. Yeah. And I think that what's been happening, and it's still unfolding now, is a sort of return to perhaps where I was at age 18 when I was going to become a painter, fine art painter.
Hmm.
And it's interesting, since leaving the business, since selling my shares, and with the encouragement of some people who I've come across on this new adventure, from their encouragement, sort of, I'm now identifying more as an artist than an entrepreneur.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I'm still getting used to that jacket. Let's put it that way. And so the context around the decision was, I think I was just, I don't know, I was coming up to my 50th birthday too. So it was the kind of perhaps the final installment of my decade-long midlife crisis that took various forms. But I think I was just ready to for a change, and I hadn't realized it. And running a business is hard, and running a business through the Great Recession of 2008 was hard, and then the pandemic, that was hard, and it's just hard. And if I think your heart isn't 100% in it, and I hadn't realized mine was, I was kind of falling out of love with the substance of the work because I was becoming more, realizing more. I was an artist, not a technologist. And whilst and I needed to pursue something that was more aligned with my head and heart. And this was very conscious at the time. I thought, no, I need to get something which is truer to me, head and heart. Like that was very much the thing. It wasn't a financial decision. It wasn't. It was a decision to pursue a closer relationship between my head and heart in my work.
Interesting. Okay, so something that I was thinking about questions I wanted to ask you before this conversation, and one that I think I'd quite like to ask is, what do you think the purpose of human life is? What do you think we're doing here, Dan? What's the point of this?
I actually, I've got a good answer to that one, and I'm going to steal this from a Julia Cameron, who wrote the book The Artist's Way, which arguably planted the seed for where I am now. But she, in that book, she said it's a very spiritual book. And when I first read it, which was in the lockdown, I struggled with that. I'm now a lot more open to that. But she said, we are all creative beings. This is a creative act, the act of being born. And I had this sort of thought, really. Actually, yeah, well, it's creativity. And actually, when I look at back at my career as an entrepreneur, I could argue the toss about how successful I've been. But as an artist, I've been wildly successful. But I've had complete creative freedom. I've done exactly what I wanted for the last 24 years. And it's worked out badly and well simultaneously. All right. So but I've had the freedom to pursue what's in my creative interests. And so for me, it's about creative freedom and creativity and the ability to build something, have children, do art, make music, build friendships. These are all forms of creativity. And it's a theme that comes up in Rick Rubin's book about creativity, about living life as an artist. Your life is a creative expression. And I've had this thing like a nature is a creative expression. Yeah, and nature is primal. The force of nature is not delicate. It can be, but it can be very rough. And again, it's something that Bernardo Kastrup spoke about his diamond doesn't care for him. It's just a creative expression of a force of nature. And I kind of resonated with that. I thought, yeah, it's just I have something trying to express itself through me. And I can only understand that as a force of nature. And it's up to me to allow that to blossom, unfold, uh, realize itself. And it'll take, and I don't know where this is going to go. This is the conclusion I've come to, is I'm expressing stuff. And when I kind of get in the way of it, or when I think I know what I'm doing, it's more difficult. When I just go with it, it's both easier and goes far more interesting places. And I'm literally in the middle of that now. So I thought I knew what I was doing when I left the business. It's now evolving and creating something very different and significantly more interesting, actually.
There, when I spoke with Bernardo about this, there were a couple of things that really stood out for me. The first is that he actively negotiates with this force. He personalizes it, and he basically like puts limits on it. So he will not let himself just be totally taken by, because plays a very strong force in his life. Um, so that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that, you know, I think we need a way to discern between this force and then these kind of like more, I suppose, shallower desires, like things that are maybe coming up from the ego a little bit, you know? So I'm curious, like, how do you discern between what's coming from this real deep place and what is, uh, might be coming from a shallower place?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's funny because, of course, so this is the practice of active journaling that I mentioned. Okay, so this practice I've got, which I do, I would say every day, purely because it's how I achieve what you've just said. Okay, so before I do anything, before I look at my phone, before I look at any email, before I don't listen to the news, I will go to my office and I'll sit down with a journal and I'll engage in this practice of active journaling. Again, I got this actually from Julia Cameron's concept of morning pages, where you write out longhand 3 sides of A4. So I try and do about 3 sides of A4 longhand, not on a computer. I read somewhere the connection between your unconscious and your fingers is just more real. And so before I wake up, really, before I get engaged with the rest of the world, I sit with myself or with my unconscious and let it kind of vomit out whatever is in it. And often it's like a whole like hairball of fear and anxiety and worry about something, right? And so I call it sort of getting the froth off of the coffee. You know, like you don't want the cappuccino froth really. You want the coffee. Okay, well it's there. You just got to get rid of it. Get past it. So I get all that down, and the act of putting onto the page immediately dissipates it. And often in that process, I can see patterns of, let's call it egoic or more shallow urges or thoughts, because they're not new. These are things that come to me all the time, like a kind of tapping on the shoulder. It's like always there. It's like, bloody hell. Yet I have this big thing about looking foolish. Okay, and it's really ridiculous because I'm like really keen on fancy dress and I've made like a quote fool of myself a lot, but it's always been in the context of something I've created, like a show or something. I'm really fearful of looking foolish when I'm not the one designing the looking foolish. So like I've missed something, all right? So there's a hypervigilance in me about looking foolish. Now, just hold that thought. that comes up all the time. And when I sit with this, like I'll be like, oh yeah, maybe I'll not get that document in time to the meeting. And if you dig into it, the reason why I'm worried about it is I end up looking foolish in front of somebody, right? But by writing it down and letting a little bit of a sort of stream of consciousness on the page, I then see it and go, aha, it's my old friend, the fear of looking foolish. Okay. So it's not that many. It's just like a few things that like a meme that always comes back and it has 1,000 forms, but it's always the same source, anxiety or fear. So by actively going into it, actively leaning into the issue and actively sort of picking up the pebbles to see what's underneath it, I get to see that it's my old nemesis looking foolish. And there are others as well. And I kind of go, well, that means I can identify the source emotion and the source energy, for want of a better word. So I don't get caught up with that in my day where I act it out once I've opened up my laptop and I've picked up my phone. So the key is to sort of have that ability to be quiet so you can start to catch, like I said, the algorithms, the sort of patterns that are running in you. I don't know if I like dance music. Okay, so I grew up with kind of rave and house music back in the early 90s. And my favorite DJ is a guy called Danny Tenaglia. And what he does, he used to do this in the 90s, was get techno records from Berlin and slow them down and play them in soul house music clubs in New York. Because when you slowed down the techno music, there were these very interesting drum patterns playing percussion, but you couldn't hear it when it was very fast. But slower, you could see it and hear it. And I think this is the same principle for our habits and reactive patterns and just behaviors. They're running at a pace and you can't quite see the detail within them. You just click response. But if you slow down the patterns, like Danny Tenaglia slows down the techno and you hear the percussion, you can see it and then you can make an intentional judgment whether that's serving you or not.
For sure. For sure.
And so that quiet and me to be able to have that on the page is I'm almost writing it out. Then I can see the slowed down pattern and then I can act on it or not. And that for me helps me to discern between fear and calling and deeper currents and more shallow currents.
So whenever you're doing these 3 pages, are you actively slowing down when you're doing it, or are you just getting everything out and then you slow down afterwards as you're reading through it? Like, how does this actually look?
Yeah, well, so I would just jot down anything, and it's not what I'm not doing is writing a coherent narrative. What I'm not doing is reflecting on going for a coffee yesterday with my friend. This is not diary journaling. This is just vomiting out what's in my consciousness at that moment. It could be completely incoherent, like brain farts of things happening, maybe a dream or a fragment of an emotion or something, anything, whatever's to mind. And the reason I like writing it is because you can draw between the elements or like one word and another word, or you can scribble around it to emphasize it for yourself. But really, it's not in any way, the first third of it is really not anything to do with organizing information. It's just extracting or releasing information. It's like a kind of, this is all the static or the noise or the froth. Now, once it's down and you pause a beat and just look at it, you can see patterns. And it might be just that you've had 50 thoughts or 50 words or phrases, and all of them are basically a fear response, for example. Yeah, okay. And then you could go, okay, if all of them, or I don't know, 80% of them are really just fear. And listen, they might be very, very warranted. You might be like I have left a business and started a new business, and the business I went to set up hasn't really worked. All right. So I'm in a situation where I'm shifting the strategy and doing something new, which looks like it's amazing, actually, the new thing. But I've been going through a process over the last 3 months of literally going, wow, okay, I could run out of money. Interesting. Well, what's the implications of that? Oh, I'm really scared of that. I just slow it all down and write it all out. Because if I can see it clearly and my emotional response to it, then I can take action from a place of calm and intention and strategy, as it were, that's built on solid ground, not reactivity, fear, catastrophization. Okay. So this is not an esoteric practice. This is a very, very practical toolkit for when you're in the shit. Okay, or facing potentially being in the shit. So you get it all out, pause, reflect on it, look at it. And then this is why I call it active, because you don't want to do that. Okay, when you're in the shit, you want to take action to solve the problem that makes you feel bad.
Yeah.
But the problem is activity around a problem doesn't mean the same thing as solving the problem. All right. It could do, but often when you're acting from a place of fear and reactivity, it's just doing stuff, throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping some of it will stick. So the act of slowing it down, so writing it out, pausing, looking at it, understanding your own state. And then I often say to myself, what does my kind of soul want to tell me today? My body, okay, my spirit. And I'll just let it, I'll just be quiet and try and read the word. I'm trying to listen to my body to say what should I do, and I'll get a feeling and I'll try and sense it. And it's inarticulate, but I write something down. Okay, it might be just something like you're on the right path. Yeah, I go Roger that. Yeah, and then I do I've got a few other things that I do, and then I always set an intention for the day. So like, what's something I need to avoid? What do I want to take what's an opportunity to take advantage on? Just to set my intention before the day starts, and then I shut my journal and I never ever look at it again. The pages. I don't reflect on it. I don't go back the next day. It's like a cleansing or a clearing,
Hmm.
but it's slowing everything down.
See, this is interesting because I've been trying that sort of morning pages thing for I do that quite regularly actually, but I've never heard of this before where once you've done it, you slow down and you breathe a bit and then you read through and you might be able to spot different patterns and usually fear-based patterns here as well. And for me, that makes a lot of sense because what you're essentially doing here is you're externalizing these thought patterns that are meshed up in your sense of self, that are messed up in your identity, and you're getting them down on paper and you're getting an objective view on them, and you're sort of separating yourself from them. And then that pause can help you to bring a bit of calm to the situation and see, okay, that's present, but I don't need to act on it right now or whatever, you know. And then I love this practice afterwards where you slow down and you ask, you know, what does this maybe more wiser part of me think I should do today or whatever. So you're tapping into that sort of innate wisdom as well. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, I'll share a couple of exercises if you're interested, and it might be useful for people that I've created just for my own benefit. And I've been coaching some people. So I set up a coaching company called Founders Are Mental because entrepreneurs are mental, and that's what I've been doing since I left my tech company. And I'm in the process of pivoting that now to be something different. Still using the tools because the tools have been great. Just had a problem with the marketing. But the whole point was to try and help entrepreneurs reframe what is often a very stressful, fearful moment to moment existence. Okay, and that's been my experience in the last 24 years. And I've had various issues with burnout and depression as a result. So I learned survival strategies by actually the inner work I've done to turn them into practical tools that I was using in my active journaling practice. And I just turned that into a coaching program. All right. So I think this is the thing though. It's just kind of having it, slowing it down and seeing the patterns, slowing down the drum beat so you can see the different textures of it, and then intentionally consulting with your inner self. I talk a lot about identifying with my awareness. So not my body, my emotions, not my mind or my rational thoughts, but my awareness of the two. And that's really what the active journaling practice allows me to do very efficiently. All right. So it can be quite abstract, a lot of this conceptually. But I was calling it the awareness muscle or my awareness muscle. So I need to strengthen it. And the way I strengthen it is by running the active journaling practice. Like doing press ups. If you do press ups, you get stronger. If you engage in observation of your thoughts and observation of your emotions, you strengthen your awareness muscle.
How long do you spend in the slower phase of this? Is that 10 minutes, 15 minutes? What does
It
that look
depends.
like?
It depends. I mean, you can do it really quickly. I mean, I'd say 5 to 10 minutes minimum. And depending on what's going on, and if I've got the time, I can spend an hour or so on it. Again, it depends on what's happening for me personally. And I quite enjoy it because I've got a very active mind and it needs a lot of wrestling to the ground often, right? So this is just me. Um, but yeah, and again, it might just be not it's like something, nothing, feeling good, worried about this, da, 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 and you just pause a beat. It's giving yourself some. Like it actually happened to me this morning. I was at a conference yesterday, hosting a podcast on stage, and anyway, I was out all day, and I came back and I was like, worried about getting something done and getting something sorted. It's a Friday, whatever. And I forced myself, and I had to physically, like, well, not physically, I had to stop myself from jumping out of the chair. Do you know what I mean? To go and grab the coffee and start on the emails. I was really in that place where I was like, this is stupid. Why? No, you haven't got time. Get on with it. And I actually just wrote down, it was really simple, all the things I was thinking I had to do. And I could feel myself about 70% of the way down this list physically relax. So the physical state, it was a body state that wanted me to rush up, drink a coffee, and get onto the emails, started to dissipate 70% of the way down a list of things I knew I had to do. Right? It was so weird. And then when I did that, it was like my body got permission to just chill. And I like relaxed into the chair. And then I could just sit for a moment and go, okay, let the dust settle. I really want to do these tasks. I'm feeling like I don't. And again, another thing, I don't want to I really hate the idea of letting people down once I've given them my word. I'm very conscientious like that. I could see that I was having paused this beat, that I was worried about someone's opinion about something that I hadn't done, but I couldn't have done because I didn't have the information. And I just had this weird, I could just see this, I call it toxic diligence. It's like, it's good being diligent, and conscientious, but occasionally just sort of, you get yourself tied in knots. So, dude, you don't need to do this like in the next 3 hours. You could do this on Monday. And there's part of me, because of some quirk in my patterns in me, wants to get it done because it feels guilty. Now, had I not slowed myself down, had I not paused a beat and written it out, my body wouldn't have relaxed. I'd have got some caffeine in me. I'd have started doing some stuff, and I'd perhaps had this chaotic morning where I did everything half cocked. But instead, I managed to sort of just relax myself a little bit. This sort of, I've been out for the day. I need to get back on top of it. I'm behind on something. I should have done that thing. Oh my gosh, what will they think of me? And then I could see it go, okay, it's just that pattern. That's why I'm feeling this way. Okay. It's not anything that's actually happened. It's like an embedded script that's running again. Like the fear of being judged for letting people down. Yeah, that's one, and I have a lot of scarcity around money just because of how I grew up. So these are all fear of not having money coming in. That was always a thing around cash flow, and it's just like I have a lot of tense energy in my body around that. And it's not that those things aren't important. It's just that sometimes your reactions to potential problems, perceived problems, or actual problems don't help you resolve the problem.
For sure, for sure. Okay. So you mentioned earlier, Dan, that you'd suffered a little bit from depression and burnout.
Mm.
Can you maybe tell us about that experience and what you learned from it?
Yeah, well, it took me a long time to learn the lessons from it, if I'm honest. So I was a very slow learner. So I set up a company at age 27 and sort of carried on the habits of the sort of 19-year-old Dan Kirby until my early 30s. And so I had a business, had a young family, and I was still going out. I mentioned I like dance music. In fact, this is a funny story. I went to see my DJ, Danny Tenaglia, in Ibiza. It's all his fault, this. Now, so I went to see him in Ibiza and came back with a cold, which turned out to be pneumonia or a form of pneumonia. And what it was my body just went, stop, because I was running a small business that was fast growing. There was lots of, I'd never done it before. It was very stressful. I'd just had a child, and babies don't sleep. And I was living my life like a 20-year-old at age 30 or 32. And I kind of just went conked out. And it's funny. I read Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No. And I was like, yeah, that's what happened. My body said no. Like, you can't carry on like this. So it forced me to slow down. But I kind of like limped along a lot in my 30s just with my health, and was diagnosed with depression in my early 40s, which was actually very helpful because at least I knew there was some sort of category into which you could put my up and down mood or whatever. But I really, like, as soon as I kept on fixing myself and then going back to old habits. Okay, so this whole thing about patterns and habits is very real for me. It's been a source of self-sabotage, and so I kind of didn't learn the lesson very quickly. It took me probably till age 45, I would say. From age 32, I think the first burnout. I had a couple of sort of burnout episodes and a depression diagnosis. I was ebbing and flowing with fixing it and then going back to bad habits. Like, so drinking was a thing. You know, I would describe myself as like an LA alcoholic, in that, you know, in Britain, nobody bats an eyelid. But if you were in LA, they'd think you were an alcoholic. So just liked drinking. I was always identified with this kind of guy that could do that kind of thing. And it also led to a point in my mid 40s where I call it the blow up. I had a podcast called Honey, I Blew Up the Business. This is what I call the blow up, because the business blew up and then my life blew up and everything. All the chickens came home to roost at age 45. And it was so all these patterns and habits were very strong. So as I was trying to get myself better, that would pull me back. The shadow was bringing me back to the dark side, until the blow up. And in the blow up, the business hemorrhaged lots of money. I nearly lost my marriage, just all as a result of my own lack of attention. Let's call it that. Okay. And I had this moment sat as my ego / life was in tatters around me, where I literally had this thought. I thought, I can't pretend anymore that I'm good at this. You know, like, the facts don't support the internal narrative here, Dan. And it was a humbling experience. And I remember, like, I had possibly the first time where I just stopped and went, hang on, this is just not, like, whatever the math of the thing I was creating, just the sums at the end of it don't add up. It just doesn't add up, the whole thing. So I was forced to confront this reality that I wasn't really conducting my life right. And that was the start of my inner work. So this is a 5-year project. I'm 50 now. I was 45 then, where I was forced to go, well, if the problem, well, actually, I didn't have to. This was a choice. I could have pointed the finger at a lot of people for the circumstances I was in if I chose to. And I chose not to. I chose to accept responsibility. So that responsibility was a big slice of humble pie. And if I took responsibility, it meant I had the ability to respond to the situation. And so I took it upon myself to read a lot. And from, you know, in fact, that was the time when Jordan Peterson was becoming a thing. In fact, I saw him at talk in London before the Kathy Newman interview. So I'm an OG Jordan Peterson follower. And I just imbibed a lot of that. I imbibed a lot of philosophy, psychology, self-help, etc., in a sort of attempt to rebuild a philosophy that would better serve me. And I did that for a long time. I attended some coaching, business coaching, and I did a lot of self work. And over time, what happened, it became very, very apparent that the more I worked on me, on the inner part of me, what Sadhguru would call inner engineering. I read his book, Inner Engineering. Engineering the inside of me, not the external world, do the inside. And the more I did that, the better my external world got, the better my relationships got, the better the business got. It was a direct one-to-one causal link. And it was so immediate and so apparent. And my life improved so much qualitatively. It was kind of like, oh, right, this is what I've been doing wrong. I've been sort of trying to satisfy the outside world and get external validation and, serve my egoic urges, the more shallow urges you mentioned. And when I get over myself and serve a deeper calling, then everything got better.
In addition to reading the Inner Engineering book, were there any other practical things that you did at that low point that really made a big difference in helping you to come back?
Um, the main thing actually was just getting over my own thinking I was the one that was right. Again, it's like an ego thing. It's like I've got all the answers, and to humble myself. It's funny because a lot of times that strength of will can be very successful. I was, and I guess you look at my CV is very good. Put it that way. All right, it looks good, and I had a lot of successes over time, and a lot of that came from a lot of raw willpower, and it worked. So I figured, why stop that? But actually, the sort of deeper qualitative stuff came from realizing I didn't have all the answers, that I had to learn and be very much more open to others, perhaps contribution into the thing. But it was very much, yeah, I think that first principle, all right. Then on top of that, the sort of practice of learning and application of learning. I'm a real plier of the learning. I've done a lot of trial and error experimentation with principles and tactics and practices from lots of books. And
Tell me about your process for applying what you learn in books, because it's so easy just to read all these different books and not actually do anything with the information. Like, how do you actually ensure you apply it?
yeah, well, I kind of well, I read it. Well, often what I was doing was listening to a lot of stuff on Audible, and then if it resonated with me, get the book, and then I'd read the book, and then make notes from the book. This is a bit laborious, but this is what I did, and then I'd start to just absorb it in. Now, I think at the time I didn't realize what was happening, but I was formulating some tools and ways and philosophies that I actually came to, let's call it reality or traction, through the active journaling practice. So I'll give you a couple of really good examples. I mentioned this earlier about tools you could use. So if you're interested in applying the active journaling principle, step one, empty your brain. Step two, pause and reflect. Step three, ask your body what you should do today and how to approach it. And then a couple of tools that I coached in Founders Are Mental. One came from Stoic philosophy, which I called it the tool I called the Good Finder. Okay, now this is very simple. So all you need to do, Niall, if you're paying attention, is you get a piece of paper and you draw a line down the middle of it, right?
Okay.
And on the left-hand column, the left half of your piece of paper, just write down, what are my problems, as a headline. What are my issues or my problems? And on the right-hand side of your piece of paper, the right-hand column, write down, why is it good? So what I would do is I would say, because the obstacle is the way, to quote Ryan Holiday's book. If that's true and you're going to practice that, well, how do you practice that? Well, okay, what I did was go write down all your problems on the left-hand column. Just do a massive brainstorm of all of them, be it small or big, right? My wife hates me. I need to do the washing up, whatever. Like, the whole thing is a list. And you pick the squirreliest one, the worst one, the one that's the most painful. Okay. And on the right-hand column, You you sit with it until you have found why it's good. And you're not allowed to leave the page until you have things on it that not intellectually are good. Like, yeah, I suppose if I think about it, it's quite good that I, crashed the car. Okay. But embodied, so you feel it in your heart, it's good. Right? Now, this sounds a bit arse about tit because obviously everything, it can't be good. And I'm not saying that everything is good, but I'm saying that even if something's 99% a big pile of crap, there may, just may, be 1% of it that's good. That's a lesson, a learning, an insight. Yeah. So when I was in my blow up, the business was hemorrhaging money. We'd had to make a bunch of people redundant. We were still hemorrhaging money. I had to put all my life savings into it. It was a mess, right? The whole thing was like a financial mess. And I was like, well, and I did this at the time. I think I'd been reading Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership. And that was like, we'll just take ownership of it, basically. And I thought, why is this good? And I thought, well, actually, it's taught me that I'd built my business on the wrong principle. It was a service business building custom technology for people, but it wasn't quantifying the improvement and showing the return on investment. So when there was a bit of a wobble in the economy after Brexit, it was very easy to get rid of the projects that didn't show return on investment. Okay. So whilst all these very, very, very difficult, financially costly things were happening, and it was a big pile of crap on my desk, there was a pretty good insight in the middle of it. And I thought, well, that's a very expensive lesson to have learned. But if I focus on that and design this business's systems and offer to deliver that systematically, day after day, with a team of people behind me, I bet that would work better as a business proposition. And that bet was right, correct. It was a correct bet. So after the blow up, we changed the business. We took that through the pandemic. We didn't lay anybody off. There was no furloughing of anybody, and we built the business back on that one insight.
Wow.
So I'm not talking about fantasizing about things that could be good, but really what is good. And there will be something. It might be a hard lesson to admit that you need to have learned, but there'll be something. So if you go through that discipline, and this is applied stoicism, like write out the thing that's crap. And if the obstacle is the way, as Marcus Aurelius said, then what is it? Where's the action you can take from that? What's the strategy you can build from that insight? And so that's one example of how I learned to apply those. So I read Ryan Holiday's book. I'm like, that sounds great. How do I apply that? Okay, well, if I just list out some shit and pick one and figure out what's good in it, then that becomes my way forward. I lean into it. Hence, that's why it's active. Because you don't want to, of course, you want to run away and hide. And that's totally natural, but it doesn't get you anywhere when you're in the poop.
That is such a valuable tool. I'm definitely going to use that. That's fantastic. Okay, so you mentioned about the burnout and you're in this constant go, 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 like always like you feeling like just this drive, like you have to keep going, you have to keep going. And am I right in saying that in recent years you've got better at slowing down and maybe not feeling that sort of compulsive drive to always be doing things? I'm a founder myself, and I feel that pressure, and I find it difficult. I find it really difficult to stop. If I'm honest. If you could make a call to the person before you've had these insights, and you could give them some advice about how to stop, why it's important to stop, what might you tell that younger version of Dan?
Yeah, there's a point at some point in the last 5 years where I realized that what I understood to be like a kind of a good way of being whilst working was the sense of, like, when you've had one too many coffees and you're on a deadline and you have to get somewhere by a certain time and you're a bit late, right? That sort of sense of intense adrenal, like up in the red in the graphic equalizer, right? I realized that unless I was in that state, I didn't feel like I was doing it properly. I'd learned somehow that correct, unless that was like really on the edge, I subconsciously didn't think it was correct. I thought I had to be in that state because that meant, I think the sort of logic being that I was there for keeping busy, and if I was busy, I would make money, and if I made money, I'd be secure. Okay. So the problem is I wasn't aware of that until I was like in my mid 40s, about 15 or more years after being self-employed, more actually, 17 or 18 years. And so my advice to my younger self would be just pause a beat and ask yourself why. Okay. And just before you commit to the project or the new side company or the trip overseas, I know it sounds great. I know it could be great, but why are you doing it? For whom is this happening? Yeah. And the thing so I mentioned earlier, I did a podcast yesterday, live recording, and I ran an exercise again. That's I'm just repackaged this for my coaching thing, but it's asking somebody why 7 times. I think it's a Socratic questioning thing. But this is so powerful actually because people don't pause and people don't go deep because people have this sort of incessant fear state. I think it is what it is. So you feel activity is progress and progress equals safety. Okay, so the reason I'm driven, well, I had some particular reasons I was driven. I think I needed to get external validation. Okay. And that sense of diligence I spoke about was a diligence to basically an ambient aggregate avatar of approval from the outside world. Okay, so it's very dangerous because there's no one to get the approval of apart from this ambient aggregate avatar in my own mind, which didn't exist. Yeah, so I'm driving myself to the bone, unconsciously trying to satisfy an unsatisfiable thing. Okay, and I look back, and there's certain quirks to my childhood and my relationship with my father and all sorts of stuff that's in there. But I think the thing it was just me trying to satisfy something that wasn't really anything to do with me. It was external.
The ambient aggregated avatar.
Avatar. I just made that up actually on the spot. There you go. You can have that. But is this kind of like, like a kind of, you get those sort of icons for your profile picture that's just like a sort of outline of a human form, like the shed and shoulder. It's like that. It's like, well, who is it? Well, no one. What do they want? I don't know. How are you going to satisfy it? I don't know. Well, but you need to satisfy it because they might judge you because the culture might think you're a waster or you're a loser or you're not clever enough or whatever.
What you've just described in those three words, that is what is driving 99% of content producers on the internet today. Like
Hmm.
that is the thing they're afraid of. Like that's a beautiful insight.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't think. Thank you, but and that's just sort of. But it was very me. That was just me. I was just trying to satisfy this blob. It's funny actually. I think there's something in that. This whole kind of for whom are we creating the content? I saw a video actually last night on Instagram of a DJ at a festival, and the entire crowd was just had their phones up videoing it, and the video wasn't the point. But I was watching this as a man who grew up, whatever, without phones, watching this. I thought we are all being programmed to create quotes content for the machine.
Yeah.
It's just being programmed. Fill the machine with content. Keep the pipes full. And of course, none of them know that. They're just getting video of their experience with the DJ and they're enjoying it. But for what? Why? Why are you doing that? Because you're literally sort of not experiencing the real thing. You're not dancing, which is the point of dance music. You're not experiencing the music really. You're interfacing it through a piece of software and a piece of hardware. And I'm like, so to your point, for whom are these people recording that video? Is it really for themselves or is it really for Mark Zuckerberg? Yeah. And I think this is a really important thing. So if you go deep into yourself and ask yourself, again, here's another exercise for you. Sit in your journal with your phone off, with nobody else around, without being on a deadline, and say, write down at the top of the piece of paper, what do I want? Yeah. And then write down a list of stuff. I want a Ferrari. I want a Rolls Royce. I want another Ferrari. Whatever you want, that's fine. Don't judge it. Just write it down. Then go, okay, well, is there a sort of pattern amongst all of these? Okay, well, I want a lot of money, or I want a relationship, or I want to feel safe. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's just true for you. And then ask yourself why, and answer it honestly. Okay, and you know when it's not true because your body knows it's not true. So don't bullshit yourself. And do that 7 times. Okay, I did this yesterday with this woman. Woman has got a startup, an AI startup. We were talking about how she improves engagement on her startup. And I sort of ran this as an experiment with her, asked her on stage these 7 questions and got quite personal. And she basically, the reason she's doing this startup is because she wants to create connection with people. And you do that through the written word. It's like it's a book writing app with AI. And I thought, yeah, I said to listen, the reason people aren't signing up to your app is because they don't really understand that through your app, they can create connection with other people, which is what you're trying to do. If you tell me that, I'm like, oh, I'm all in. I'm very motivated. So your 7 whys will get to your true motivation. And your true motivation can be satisfied, or you can build towards it. So you're not serving an avatar that's faceless and formless. You're serving you. And if you want connection with people, for example, then it's very simple. You say any decision in your life, is this moving me towards that or away from that? And again, going back to the active journaling practice, if you've got that practice and you are aware of these kinds of things with your awareness muscle being stronger, you say, okay, if I want connection, so I want creative freedom. Dan Kirby wants creative freedom. So if I'm about to make a choice on anything, it's like, is this moving me towards a place where I will have true, unbridled creative freedom to be my true artist self or not? And then I can make decisions on that basis.
For sure. Okay. Well, these tools are very valuable, Dan. So thanks for sharing them. Just a couple of questions now to wrap up. What I'm sure you thought a lot about this, but what does success mean to you? Like, what do you think's worth striving for now? Like, what should the aim be?
Um, right. Well, I think I've just said it. For me, creative freedom is the highest goal. All right. So the ability to create, and again, it sounds a bit not, yeah, being creative is really nice, but it's a force of nature, creative force of nature. All right. So it doesn't mean it's nice. It might be really challenging and push you into situations where you're not comfortable and make you scared and be financially risky for you, or a difficult series of conversations and changes. That's what the price of being creatively free is, because you've got to express yourself in the way that's truest to you in that moment. So for me, success is, listen, I like money, I like all that stuff. That's great. But for me, the true success is like my family wanting to hang out with me, or my kids wanting to hang out with me. Actually, I've got teenage daughters. My eldest teenage daughter invited me to go to Fabric nightclub in London when she was 19, and we went, me and her. And if people know Fabric nightclub in London, it's a notorious after hours nightclub, very, very rock and roll place. And so going with your dad is not something that teenagers do. But that's what happened. And I figured, you know what? If I've got a relationship with my daughter and she invites me to go to the rave, then fine. I like the music, whatever. So I have that, and I thought that was success for me. I couldn't have anticipated that was a remote possibility, frankly. And then for me, but creative freedom. So if I can maintain a relationship with my kids where I'm just invited and it's on a level, then that's amazing. So I have to sustain that, but also then creative freedom. I want money, that's all. But I think for me, the primary motivation for me is to tap into the ability to have an idea and to make that real. However ridiculous or outlandish it might appear, if I believe it will work, I want to have the ability to be able to do that.
You're probably in, I would say, a percentage of 0.00001% of parents who would get invited to a nightclub with their children.
I'm
That's
in a
pretty incredible.
I'm in the I've unlocked elite dad status. I have to share with you. So I was in this nightclub with her. It's just 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's a rock and roll proper nightclub. And we're on the dance floor, and there's these dudes, chatting up girls on the dance floor, and they go and to speak to my daughter. And it was so funny because this happened like half a dozen times where they'd be chatting to her and she'd be like, yeah, whatever. And then you could see them whip their heads around and start looking for the dad that she's with because she's just told them that she's with that she's with her dad. I can't tell you. There was this one dude who came over and like shook my hand. This is in the middle of a dance floor with like pounding techno. Shook my hand, looked me in the eyes, and nodded like a Clint Eastwood nod, like paying his respects to the old man. It was I can't tell you, a beautiful moment, like priceless. That in fact that's do you know, let me rewind. That was success.
Amazing, amazing. All right, one last question. For anybody that is in a situation that is similar to the one you were in before you pressed the reset button on your life at 50, where they're maybe in a business or they're working in something and they're sort of like, it's okay. Um, but there's something else that I feel more kind of aligned with or called towards. But they're not taking action. They haven't sort of taken the leap towards doing that yet. What would you say to that person?
Well, recognize it, and treat it with respect. Don't just sweep it under the carpet. Don't distract yourself with Netflix and Twitter. Okay, treat it with respect because it's very, very easy to thin slice your attention, and then the next decade will go by and you won't have done anything with it. And it could be a very big regret. Okay. So the creative force of nature that I feel called to sort of act on sounds very romantic, but it means taking decisions and taking risks and doing new things and humbling yourself. I've had to really humble myself the last 6 months. I really thought I knew my shit. And it turns out I don't anymore. I need to relearn a lot of stuff. And I didn't know that until I'd done this. I had a bit of a schooling. So so I'm not romanticizing this at all. I'm saying it's really hard. But do you know what's also really hard? Staying somewhere that's not true to you and your soul knowing that. And I tell you what would be worse for me, I can't speak on anybody else's behalf, but in 10 years' time, having not acted on my daimon asking me to take a change and to look back and go, I was fearful. I chickened out. I could have given it a go. Now, I'm going to give you an example here to leave you with. So I left my business. I sold my shares. I didn't sell it for like loads of money. It was sufficient money to sort of seed finance my new thing. And at the start of the year, maybe March time, we were recording this in June. It became apparent that whilst great product, the marketing wasn't working for my new thing, Founders Are Mental. And well, it was working, but it was very hard. And I won't go into why, but it was just hard. And I realized that actually, unless I made some changes, it just wasn't going to, I didn't have sufficient cash runway to keep it going. And it wasn't really an investable thing. Well, maybe, but it's not something I wanted to do. So I needed to change the strategy. Now, it was a problem, a proper problem. Like I'm talking about, like I just did not think that was going to happen. The early stages of the business were very successful, got lots of great response, and then suddenly it sort of started to fizzle out. So I had to sort of act. So lots of plans, lots of thoughts, lots of exploring of different options, what have you. Now, whilst building Founders Are Mental, which itself is a fairly punchy, sort of spiky name, right? I was posting a lot and being similarly spiky and characterful. This is kind of how I am, and the brand called for that. So I was doing that on particularly on LinkedIn, and I connected with a dude who liked a post of mine. And it turned out he's a guy in New York who is a partner in an investment bank. Okay, whatever. Turns out 3 months later, after sort of starting to chat with this guy, I'm literally going into business with him, and he's got basically some stuff that he wanted to do. The stuff I've been doing fits with it perfectly. Inner work versus more sort of outer work on negotiation and deal making and stuff. And so the two things coming together is like a no one is doing this in the world. And it's so I have a transatlantic business suddenly that's come out of me following the call to adventure.
Fantastic.
Right. So the lesson here is your rational mind will be trying to do some math. Okay. You're in your business, you're earning your money, you've got a mortgage, you're on the the crack of a nice steady wage or a steady income. Right. It's all, you know, everything, it's very safe, but you're unhappy or you're unsatisfied or you believe there is more potential in you. This is kind of where I was. Or you want to do something that's more close to your heart. Okay, it's going to come with risk. So you're trying to predict the risk. You're analyzing the future, trying to look at what cash savings you've got, looking what future income might be. All I'm saying is that's not wrong. You should do that because you really need to take these decisions very carefully. But you cannot anticipate what will happen when you make the change. Yeah. I did not, and in fact, didn't want to go into business with anybody. And I didn't think that person would be in New York who owns an investment bank. That was not at all any part of any plan. And as it turns out, this whole thing's like really exciting, really great. I'm having to raise my game and learn a lot and meet all these amazing people because I took the decision to leave my tech company to set up the coaching thing. And so the path was non-linear and non-predictable. So my encouragement would be is the sort of universe responds to you when you make the decision. And there's a Rumi quote which I pinned up on the wall saying that the path becomes clear when you start walking the path, or words to that effect. And that is very true. You know, you don't think there's a way through, and suddenly you turn a corner and there's a way through. And so, you know, I don't know, like this for me has been this is my current experience. I'm not out of the woods. I'm very much like in squeaky bum mode, trying to make this thing happen. But these opportunities are arising. I haven't, I mean, it's just, I'm just responding to what's coming to me. And these things would not have come to me had I stayed in the careful, protected structure that I'd created for myself in the previous business. By smashing that open, it made me both vulnerable, but also open.
That's a that's a great that's a great story to end on, and I think it encapsulates so much of what we're speaking about today. You've referenced the daimon a couple of times. Just to, if people are looking for a resource on what Dan's talking about there, there's a book called, I think it's called The Soul's Code by a Jungian analyst. I think he's James Hillman. Let me just double check
That's right.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, James Hillman. That's worth checking out. But Dan, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed this, and there were so many valuable tools and stuff shared. So thanks a million. Where would you recommend people to go after this conversation to learn more about you and your work?
Probably the best bet is to go to LinkedIn. Dan Kirby on LinkedIn. I've got a bald head and glasses. If you're not looking at this on video, just connect with me on there and connect. And by the way, all these tools, I've kind of I'm trying to work out what to do with them now because I'm not selling them per se. I'm happy to share them with you. There are some. I've actually written a book which contains this stuff, which I've yet to publish. But if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I post a lot on there. I try and share good value, and I'm literally on the path building a new company with these dudes in New York, and that's very exciting. And there's lots of good stuff in that. So I'm hoping to, again, in this next phase of my life, sort of really share a lot and add a lot of value. And you know, for me, that's where the purpose lies.
Great stuff. Right, Dan. Well, I wish you all the best on this next chapter of your journey, and I'll be following closely.
Thanks, Niall. Thanks for having me.